Okay, I want to talk about left, center, and right. I think that the concepts that define these three components of this equation are very, very simple. But I think that for some reason over the years, they have become so diluted that there seems to be gray area between what all these things are and where they fit in the Overton window and all this kind of stuff. So, plainly put, the left is anti-capitalist and anti-authoritarian. The right is pro-capitalist and pro-status quo by any means necessary, including but not limited to violence and authoritarian solutions to maintaining the status quo. So the right is pro-capitalist, pro-authoritarian measures to maintain capitalist ruling class status quo. The left is all about no, capitalism exploits the working class and the masses of humanity to benefit a few people. And the second that handful of people feel threatened, they do brutal and terrible fucking things to the masses. Okay, so that's left and right. The center is what you call a fucking liberal. The center is what you call a fucking liberal, okay? Period. There is no gray area to this. Liberals are the center of those two polemics, okay? And liberals like to say, oh, they're both extreme, when they're not. Liberals are wrong on that. Liberals are right in the sense that these right-wing things are very, very extreme because they will go to extreme measures to maintain their power, and they'll abuse and oppress and exploit anyone they can to do it. That's fucking extreme. Over on the opposite side is saying, hey man, don't fucking abuse me and murder me and oppress me and exploit me so that you can have a few extra fucking dollars. I think that's an injustice, and I don't think that humanity should have to suffer that. That is not an extreme position. Now, one could argue that the closer you get to the right, the more extreme your thinking becomes. I would assert that it's an extreme way of thinking to say, from a centrist position, that you can compromise with this thinking on the right. That you can make deals with it and get concessions from it. All the while clearly ignoring the fact that every concession you make is one more element of power being handed to the right-wing extremists. Liberals are the center who say, look, man, the socialists, Marx, Malatesta, Goldman, Proudhon, Engels, Lenin, they all said what they said about how capitalism works and what it will do to maintain its power. That's correct. Like they're dead on, because it is. It's just a fact-based material analysis of the conditions for both the workers and the bosses under capitalism. But where they depart from leftist thinking, where liberals depart from leftist thinking, is they think, yeah, but we can make deals with it. You can't. You can't make deals with it. And with all that said, with that understanding that the bottom line is, leftism is anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian. Right-wing is pro-capitalist, pro-authoritarian. The center is what you call a fucking liberal who thinks they can make compromises with the right. Now, with all that said, I want to get to another issue that's been causing me consternation lately, and I find very frustrating in my search for like cool leftist online media. All I really get is progressive media, which is, sorry progressives, liberal. Progressive is not leftism, it's liberalism. And I would say that the only thing that differentiates a progressive from a quote-unquote liberal is that what liberal has become defined by the Democratic Party now, and especially the DNC establishment, who espouse a lot of ideas, social ideas and civil rights notions and things that, and the Me Too thing, which they don't really care about if you see the way they're defending Biden now. They'll espouse and stand on a lot of these social issues that leftists tend to care about. But really, in the end, they're just using those social issues, and they're seeming solidarity with those the people in those positions, those marginalized minority positions. They're seeming solidarity with them is really just to facilitate the maintaining of the status quo. Okay, so the difference between a liberal and a progressive, in my estimation, is a liberal is someone who says a bunch of stuff that sounds good on social issues and whatever. A progressive is someone who really internalizes them and wants to go out and make them happen in the real world. They're active, they're engaged, they're motivated. They're motivated, though, to push and enact liberal policies. Now, they may be using a Marxist critique of capitalism to diagnose the issues that they're trying to tackle and they're trying to cure, because that is the best way to analyze so many of the injustices we're currently experiencing globally. So much of it is tied back to the perpetuation of this capitalist system that exploits the masses. So it's very useful to use Marx to go, okay, or any other socialists, right? To use the socialist critique of capitalism is so useful because it gets you to what the real problem is. Now, what your remedy is, far too often what we're hearing from progressives is a liberal remedy. And this all actually really brings me to the reason I wanted to make this video, is because I had a pretty harsh falling out with Ben Burgis. And based on this notion of our understanding of what is socialism, what is liberalism, what is right wing. Ben Burgis calls himself a Marxist, and he believes that Marx had an accurate critique of capitalism, and he's embraced Marx's critique of capitalism. But he recently came out in defense of Noam Chomsky's sort of tacit, not even suggestion, like Chomsky's position has been that, you know, if you vote for Biden, even though he's a disgusting pig, it's still better than voting for Trump. Now, whether you believe that that's true or not is aside from the point. The bottom line is that is a position embraced by liberals and not by socialists. Now, Burgis is taking the position, he actually posted on Facebook that anybody who espouses that that is a liberal position with Chomsky is only deserving of pity. I took issue with that, and I went at Ben for it. And I said, not only is it, I think, an accurate assessment of Chomsky's current position, I don't think it's fair to gaslight people as only being deserving of pity for asserting that Chomsky has arrived at a liberal position on the 2020 election. And now I'm going to show you the shit to prove this falling out I had with Ben Burgis. But I'm also going to take the time to prove the point that it's a liberal position. Whether you think it's the best position or not, again, that's aside from the point. It's a liberal position and not a socialist one. Okay, but before we get into all of that, I think it's, we need something fun to kick with, so check this shit out, and then we'll be back, and I'll be discussing my Facebook debate with the liberal Ben Burgis.
Guillotine truck! MC Tank Mechanic 5, live from the quarantine! Boom, 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 boom! Yo, fuck Trump and fuck Joe Biden! Yeah, MC Tanky and Guillotine Truck, just the same as Mr. Hanky, and we don't give a fuck. We ain't selling out the working class and think we're gonna vote or sell, then you shit out of luck. Here's some proof that we gonna keep it on the left, proletarian socialist road. Like the sample on this rice track, we gonna kill motherfucking Depeche Mode. Just kidding, they're gonna stay alive and well, except for Richard Spencer's hand. Favorite band, so you say, but even they all hope you get cancer. Dead. Fuck you and fucking Oswald cronies. We're doing this for the fallen homie Roy Loney. 73, he was still getting stony. Let's go. Probably hated all you jabronis. Open up wide, cause I'm gonna feed you with my new logs. Gonna chill, won't talk, won't even say gulag. Don't people flashing gulag. shit, you lucked out, cause I can't afford no hand grenades. Now you got another thing coming, it's called the Maryland Buck Brigade. What I think of white genocide, we will replace you, you will be replaced. We the loud, we the proud, we the happies and the race traitors that you love to hate. Fuck liberals, we doing it faster, empower the advanced, isolate the backwards. Dialectically material, ethereal, venereal, rebellion, no gods, no masters. Don't tell us how to vote, how to organize, you push your solidarity with the crooks. Still talking that talk, where were you when arson threats came down on revolution books? We in Berkeley, time for some of them sesame crack noodles from famous Bow. Run home, gonna eat standing up, cause the cat took my seat, we call him Chairman Meow. What you want, what the fuck you expect? Some reactionary shit like Lin Biao? We don't want no revision, we want revolution and revolution now. What's the matter, scared? Think we still joy riding on Stalin's dick? Y'all putting Trotsky a quarterback, y'all can't escape the motherfucking pick six. Look at us, we can't even nominate Bernie, who more innocent than Remus and Romulus. So what the fuck makes you think 270 electoral college votes would go to a communist? Can't vote away the evil empire, capitalism ain't got no spare tire. Gotta see the conditions and how dire, gotta take every flag, set them all on fire. Gotta let it burn red, gotta fight till you're dead. This ain't no conquest of bread, following the lead of Chairman Fred. Gotta let it burn red, gotta fight till you're dead. This ain't no conquest of bread, we following the lead of Chairman Fred. Gotta let it burn red, gotta fight till you're dead. This ain't no conquest of bread, we following the lead of Chairman Fred. 161, 1312, 510. That's right, fuck 12.
I believe that I'm going to be able to die. What I was is the thing that I was born for. I believe that I'm going to be able to die high off the people. I believe that I will be able to die as a revolutionary in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle. And I hope that each one of you will be able to die in the international proletarian revolutionary struggle, even in people living in it. And I think that struggle is going to come. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people?
Okay, so like I said, I had a falling out or debate or whatever on Facebook with author and logic professor and frequent guest on the Michael Brooks Show's Debunk segment, Ben Burgis, in relation to something he posted about Noam Chomsky. So what he had posted on Facebook was this. This is a couple weeks back. It's, if you think Noam Chomsky is a liberal, you've lost the plot so thoroughly that the only appropriate response is pity. I don't know this for sure, but I think it's safe to assume that the reason Ben was making this post at the time he did was because it was a huge hot topic amongst the leftist community and the Twitter sphere and whatever, what Chomsky had just said in relation to Joe Biden in the 2020 election. So now, of course, Ben Burgis isn't stating that specifically, so I may be making a leap in assuming that this was in reference to that, but when he posted it, this is what everyone was talking about. I'm going to show you that clip from Chomsky, and we're going to kind of break it down and go through it. But I felt it was important to make that distinction and clarification. That clearly, in Ben's Facebook post, he does not say, hey, this is all based on what Chomsky said about Biden in the Democracy Now! Interview. But I think it's safe to assume that that is the debate and topic that he was commenting on or reflecting on. So, yeah, with all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the Chomsky interview and the statements that he made that caused all of this controversy online that I believe led Ben to make this post on Facebook, which ultimately led to him and I having a debate and subsequent falling out over what I believe was a debate over what is socialism and what is liberalism and what are liberal versus socialist positions, and where does Chomsky fit in those two distinctions in terms of the 2020 election and his comments on Biden. So let's take a look and we'll figure it out for ourselves.
Trump is reelected. It's an indescribable disaster. It means that the policies of the past 4 years, which have been extremely destructive to the American population of the world, will be continued and probably accelerated. What this is going to mean for health is bad enough. I just mentioned the Lancet figures. It will get worse. What this means for the environment, or the threat of nuclear war, which no one is talking about, but is extremely serious, is indescribable.
Okay, so I don't find any problems there really with Chomsky's assessment of who Trump is and what it would mean to have a second Trump administration term. Pretty dead on accurate if you ask me. But let's see what he has to say in terms of what a Biden administration might look like, because it's there that I think we'll find where these sort of cries of Chomsky's a liberal are sort of catching their fire.
I suppose Biden is elected. I would anticipate it would be essentially a continuation of Obama. Nothing very great, but at least not totally destructive. And opportunities for an organized public to change what is being done, to impose pressures. It's common to say now that the Sanders campaign failed. I think that's a mistake. I think it was an extraordinary success, completely shifted the arena of debate and discussion. Issues that were unthinkable a couple of years ago are now right in the middle of attention. The worst crime he committed in the eyes of the establishment is not the policies proposing. It's the fact that he was able to inspire popular movements which had already been developing, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, many others, and turn them into an activist movement which doesn't just show up every couple of years to push a lever and then go home, but applies constant pressure, constant activism, and so on. That could affect a Biden administration. We've seen some very striking examples. Take, say, the Green New Deal. A couple of years ago, that was an object of ridicule if it was mentioned at all. Some form of Green New Deal is essential for the survival of humanity. Now it's part of the general agenda. Why? Activist engagement, especially Sunrise Movement. Group of young people acted significantly up to the point of sitting in congressional offices. They received support from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other young legislators who came into office as part of the Sanders-inspired popular wave. Another great success. Ed Markey, senator from Massachusetts, joined in. And now it's part of the legislative agenda. The next step is to force it through in some viable form, and there are very good ideas as to how to do that. Well, that's the way things can change. With a Biden presidency, there would be, if not a strongly sympathetic administration, at least one that can be reached, can be pressured. And that's very important. You look over the very good labor historian, I'm sure you know Eric Loomis, who's studied the efforts by working people to institute changes in the society, sometimes for themselves, sometimes for the society generally. And he's pointed out and made an interesting point. These efforts succeeded when there was a tolerant or sympathetic administration, not when there wasn't. That's a big one of many enormous differences between Trump, the sociopath, and Biden, who's kind of pretty empty. You can push him one way or another. This is the most crucial election in human history, literally. Another 4 years of Trump, and we're in deep trouble.
Okay, sounds pretty simple, right? Pretty cut and dry. But I would argue not. I would argue that there's actually quite a bit to unpack there, and that it's not quite as simple as the framing that Chomsky has given it, especially if you apply a historic and valid socialist critique to the issues he's discussing. And I'm going to break all that down, but first I just want to clarify something that, I have immense respect for Noam Chomsky, and I'm going to show you this is kind of self-indulgent, I guess. Yeah, I like to show some of my art and my paintings in some of these videos, like when they apply. I mean, I painted those, but the first painting I ever did that I felt like, wow, maybe I'm kind of starting to get the hang of this painting thing, as opposed to just doodling out shit to, I don't know, help me cope with the chronic anxiety that comes with the PTSD that I am forced to deal with because of the fucking state. But the first painting I did that I felt kind of proud of and felt like, wow, that's kind of almost like a real painting, was this. And this was in 2016. So why would I take the time to paint the image of another person? Because I have immense respect for them. But I don't feel that Chomsky has been consistently solid in his analysis of current events. And I'm going to illustrate why I think that. Okay, the reason that I bring all that up is because there has been actually a long discussion in leftist circles about kind of, is Chomsky's analysis as good as it used to be? And we at Punks for Progress have actually been discussing this for quite some time. I refer people to this video that we did in 2017. It's about Chris Hedges, but we also touch on Chomsky's statements at the time in relation to Antifa, where he had made the statements and others in the same vein of that Antifa was the greatest gift to the alt-right, which don't think it's any surprise that many anti-fascists took umbrance with that type of sentiment and statement. But we covered that a lot in that video, and that's me and Pico the Bear, who you know from a number of Punks for Progress videos, as well as Comrade Carrico, who you may know from the alt-right Days of Rage documentary on Netflix. But we discuss, just how socialist is socialist, anarcho-syndicalist Chomsky these days. And anyway, so again, the reason I share all this is because people have fallen on some very different positions in terms of Chomsky. There's a lot of communists and anarchists who are just done with him and outright kind of angered by him, and I think there's some valid reasons for that. And I'm not happy with a number of his statements, and again, watch that video that I showed you if you want to, and you'll see in more depth what those criticisms are. But I don't hate Chomsky. I still don't hate Chomsky, and I still find that a lot of his analysis is useful. But I'm much more sort of apprehensive and skeptical when I do listen to him. So anyway, just wanted to kind of clarify that and sneak in a picture of my painting. Anyway, let's get on with it. Let's break down what he actually said about Biden. Okay, so Chomsky essentially compares a potential Biden administration to being just ultimately the equivalent of the past Obama administration, which he characterizes as
nothing very great, but at least not totally destructive.
Okay, so for me, that raises two questions. The first being, will a Biden administration actually be like essentially an extension of the Obama administration, and the second question being, just how destructive was the Obama administration? And more specifically, and particularly, for who was the Obama administration either mildly or totally destructive? I think it depends on which prison you live in and which country you live in and what color you are, just how destructive, totally or otherwise, the Obama administration may have been for you. So I want to explore those two questions. But before I do, I want to pause for a second and take note that this is something that'll become relevant a little later in the video, that I think that there are some clear differences between Biden and Obama, but in terms of Western imperialist hegemonic global power, I think the differences between Biden and Obama are not only marginal, but the differences between Biden and Trump are ultimately marginal. Again, in terms of a socialist critique of Western imperialist capitalist hegemonic power over the entire planet. Yes, I'm gonna illustrate that there are clear differences between all of these people, Biden, Obama, Trump, all of them, okay? But again, the question really is going to be, like, who is actually directly affected by these differences and who aren't? Because I think it'll be easy to argue that under all of these people's administrations, there's people whose lives will be totally destroyed. So, let's start out by taking a look at, is Biden like Obama? Well, let's call this Biden's greatest hits.
After 8 years alongside President Obama, Joe Biden is coming back as a solo act.
I'm ready to go.
With his long record facing a new look under the spotlight of the 2020 campaign.
Gentlemen and ladies of the Senate.
One chapter receiving fresh scrutiny comes from his earliest years in the Senate, when he strongly opposed mandatory school busing. It was designed to achieve integration and a more equitable education. It was the mid-1970s. Biden favored desegregation, but not through busing. What's less known is how he followed the lead of some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. In a series of never-before-published letters reviewed by CNN, the strength of Biden's opposition to busing comes into sharper focus. On March 25, 1977, Biden wrote, "My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our educational system." Biden sought and received support from Mississippi Senator James Eastland, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. He frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Biden reflected on that era earlier this year.
There were a bunch of racists. There was, James O. Eastland, Mississippi, Strom Thurmond, and so on. There were 9 guys who were in the caucus that were, I ran against in the civil rights movement.
But he did not say that Eastland and others were partners on several of Biden's anti-busing bills. On June 30th, 1977, Biden wrote, "Dear Mr. Chairman, I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in attempting to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote." Then in 1978, Biden again asked Eastland to put his anti-busing bill before the full Senate, writing, "Your participation in floor debate would be welcome." Ronnie Dunn is a professor at Cleveland State University who co-wrote the book Boycotts, Busing, and Beyond.
Those letters I find somewhat surprising given Senator Biden's or Vice President Biden's current position and potential candidacy for the presidency and his position as a liberal. Those are issues that he's obviously going to have to answer for.
You said surprising. Surprising in what way?
Well, the fact that he would solicit the support of staunch segregationists, James Eastland as well as Jesse Helms, introducing legislation as opposing busing at that time.
Welcome, Professor Hill.
Thank you.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged? It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility.
Is there anything that he could say to you that would make it right?
You know, I don't think it's a matter of what he could say. I really want our leaders to stand up and say, what happened in 1991 will never happen again. What happened in 2018 with the Senate hearing will not happen again.
The Brett Kavanaugh hearings bringing back the trauma of the Clarence Thomas confirmation nearly 3 decades ago.
Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. They were traumatic not only for me, they were traumatic for members of my family.
I watched your parents sitting there.
I mean, my parents were so stoic and so brave, and my concern was that I couldn't protect them.
Anita Hill's frustration even after the Me Too movement, and with women now on the Judiciary Committee, not enough has changed. Did you identify with Christine Blasey Ford?
I definitely did identify with her because it was still that intense pressure from this group of panelists on the committee who really didn't seem to understand the issue of sexual harassment at all.
So we were in a semi-private place. It wasn't completely private. He was at first talking to someone. They went away, and then he said, "Come here." And then when I gave him the gym bag, it happened all in one motion almost. And he had me against the wall. And then his hands were down my skirt and up my skirt. And I was wearing, I wasn't wearing face or anything. And he then, with his hand, went from there and entered me with his hand, and as he was trying to kiss me and saying things to me. So when I tell you what happened, it's hard because everything kind of happened at once, but there were incremental parts to it. Mm-hmm. And meaning he was just trying to kiss me and I was pulling away. And what I remember of that time is feeling really shocked. I was surprised because there was no real conversation right beforehand. There was no precursor. It just happened. And then when he did that, I was obviously pulling away. And he pulled back and said, "Come on, man, I heard you liked me." Something to that effect. And that's what kind of jolted me. Like I was trying to think what I did wrong to bring that on me. And then he looked angry and irritated with me. And that's when I knew it was really, I was in a very difficult position because he was my boss and he was like my dad's age at the time. And I trusted him and looked up to him. And it was not like I disliked him. I liked him, but I just didn't like him in that way. And it was just shocking. It was shattering, actually. And he said to me when he pulled back, he pointed his finger at me and he said, "You're nothing to me. You're nothing." He pointed his finger at me and he said, "You're nothing to me. You're nothing."
Is there anything that he could say to you that would make it right?
You know, I don't think it's a matter of what he could say. I really want our leaders to stand up and say, what happened in 1991 will never happen again. What happened in 2018 with the Senate hearing will not happen again.
Okay, well, that's not some type of comprehensive look at who Biden is and every, shortcoming and illustration of why he's vastly different than Obama. But it does illustrate, I think, what are some key points where he is distinctly different than Obama. Obama did not have a long history of working directly with segregationists and out-and-out racists and coming out and writing legislation against busing during segregation. And secondly, Obama does not have a long history of treating also women of color with absolute disrespect, like Biden did during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings with his treatment of Anita Hill. And then, of course, and I think this is the one thing that will make a significant difference in the way that the two administrations would function, is Obama did not have this long history of being touchy-feely and just outright sexually inappropriate with woman after woman after woman. And however anyone might feel about those things and the validity of them, I mean, there's just such overwhelming evidence out there that he's got serious issues. The bottom line is all of this stuff, and especially the Tara Reade stuff, which I just want to be clear, I believe Tara Reade. I don't see how you can listen to her accounts on Rising or with Megyn Kelly and not feel the same sense of clarity and honesty that you got from Blasey Ford, even with more. There's all kinds of corroborating, contemporary corroborating evidence at the time. There's just more stuff to substantiate and corroborate Tara Reade than there even was for Blasey Ford, who I absolutely believed. But the point being, all of this stuff is going to dog a Biden administration no matter what. It's not going away. And so I think that's a significant difference. But still, in terms of, if you're a Palestinian, I don't think it makes a fucking difference. America's still going to shit all over you and support Israel and its brutal, brutal, brutal treatment of the people of Palestine. So it's all relative, right? I mean, unless you're the one whose life is being destroyed and your children killed. Now, that speaks to, how devastating or destructive or lack thereof is an Obama administration in comparison to a Trump administration. Well, I think it's marginal if not non-existent. Again, Obama was very articulate. He because he's an educated person, head of the Harvard Law Review. Trump is a stupid person who's never been very articulate. He could barf out catchphrases with confidence, but he doesn't know anything, and it's so clear he's never had any type of intellectual curiosity, where Obama clearly had intellectual curiosity. But again, that's just how they talk at a podium. That's just how they deliver their policy. Obama makes you feel more comfortable when he's, as an American, as he's drone striking the shit out of all kinds of women and children in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, yes, of course, that's been ramped up under the Trump administration. But if you look back at each and every administration, regardless of whether they had an R or a D in front of them, the openness and the brazenness with which American and imperialist, capitalist, hegemonic power conducts itself just becomes increasingly more brutal and more just open with each successive administration. And each one, in its own way, whether Republican or Democrat, has done its own things to sort of chip away at the veneer of, not just the veneer of it, but even the sort of legal restrictions and constitutional restrictions that would bind administrations from being so openly brazen as we see with now the current Trump administration. But so I would assert that, keeping in mind the successive history with which Western imperialist hegemonic power has become more emboldened and more outright and more open and less restricted with each administration, I don't see any reason to believe that the next administration, regardless of whether it's Biden or Trump or Hillary, or if we put Obama back in there, I think that Western imperialist hegemonic power will continue to clamp down and continue to be brutal and work in congruence with other brutal regimes like the Saudi regime, or with Viktor Orban, or with that fucking scumbag Bolsonaro. And I don't see much change in that, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat. But yeah, the nightly news will be more palatable if you don't have just a gross, vulgar scumbag like Trump just spewing the most gnarliest, like, the things that just hit you instinctively as being foul and wrong. You know, I mean, Obama, you know, packaged his mass death and murder in a way that wasn't like just stabbing you in the ear with it like Trump does, you know, metaphorically, obviously. But, so are they different? Yeah. I mean, they're different in terms of the way you'll perceive the nightly news as an American. But also, you know, are they different for women in America? I'm not seeing any reason to think that Biden would create any type of atmosphere that's any less patriarchal and disgusting as the one under Trump, as the one under the one before him, and the one before him. It's always been a patriarchal country, and I don't see any reason why Biden would do anything to undo that patriarchy that socialists are hyper focused on ending. It's a pretty serious component of socialism, is recognizing the all-encompassing power of patriarchy in Western culture and with capitalism, but undoing it and getting rid of it. And so, yeah, I don't see any substantive difference between any of these people. Now, lastly, Chomsky makes the assertion that, based on some source that he cites, I have no doubt is accurate, but that the larger point being that if we have someone in office who is open to our goals, we're more likely to be able to achieve those goals than if we had someone in office who was opposed to them. Okay, like, I don't see why that would have to be articulated, because it's kind of a truism. Of course, we would want someone who agrees with us as opposed to someone who doesn't. And I don't think I need a study to illustrate to me that someone who agrees with me is more likely to work with me than someone who disagrees with me. Now, with that said, the question is Biden the guy that's more amenable to hearing out and taking action on things that we as leftists actually care about? And I just see no reason to think that he is. I mean, even less so than Biden or than Obama was. And so what this, again, finally, ultimately, all comes down to is, if you think any of these differences are important and crucial, then I just think that you're looking at it from a liberal perspective. Because if you are a liberal, then sure, maybe some of these things, you know, they are important and they are on your radar. But if you're a poor working class, oppressed person in, you know, the global South, or like I keep saying, in Palestine, or, you know, Iranian people affected by sanctions, there's no difference between Obama, Biden, Hillary, Trump, any of them. But yeah, your nightly news might be more palatable to you. It might make you less upset if, you know, Biden isn't saying the crudest and rudest, most grossest, most just clearly stupid fucking things like Trump regularly says. Yeah, the nightly news will be better. And if you think that that's important, you might be a fucking liberal. We're going to move on because I want to talk about what do actually historic socialists, what have they had to say about being involved in electoral politics and bourgeois politics and liberal politics. I also just wanted to point out that, like, again, this is not something that leftists have arrived at this conclusion that Chomsky has become more liberal just because of this Biden thing. And that's why I illustrated earlier and made point to note that we had made this video in 2017 where we were calling into question, like, is Chomsky still applying a socialist sort of remedy for his diagnosis of the ills of capitalism? we took that into question, and now we're doing that too. So to assert like Ben Burgis did that, I know we've so completely lost the game or whatever that was. I think that's a little presumptuous and maybe even a little arrogant. And again, we're going to look into what actually credible and socialists, anarchists, communists have said throughout our history in relation to this topic. But before we get to that, let's take a quick break and see what Guillotine Truck thinks about Joe Biden.
Oh, shut up! Silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in. Well, I heard Biden was a loser. I mean, look, Joe never got more than 1%, except Obama took him off the trash heap, and now it looks like he's failing. It looks like his friends from the left are going to overtake him pretty soon. But I heard, his whole campaign is to hit Trump. You look at what the Obama administration did in terms of the military, in terms of security, in terms of other nations, in terms of almost everything. Much of it now, fortunately for everybody here, has been overturned. But look, when a man has to mention my name 76 times in a speech, that means he's in trouble. Now, I have to tell you, he's a different guy. He looks different than he used to. He acts different than he used to. He's even slower than he used to be. I'd rather run against, I think, Biden than anybody. I think he's the weakest mentally. And I like running against people that are weak mentally. I think Joe is the weakest up here. The other ones have much more energy. I don't agree with their policies, but I think Joe is a man who, I call him 1% Joe, because if Bill Obama came along, he would do very well. But but I don't bring him up.
This is a guy who does everything to separate and frighten people. It's about fear and loathing. It's about what he calls people, the names he calls them. No president. I mean, it's bizarre. And it's damaging. And so I think he's genuinely a threat to our core values. And he's a threat to our standing in the wall. The D-Day ceremony. It was astounding to me that he was tweeting attacks on everybody from the Mayor of London to Bette Midler. He found time to go after Bette Midler.
Okay, so let's recap a little bit. In the introduction, basically what I established was that to be right-wing is to be pro-capitalist, pro-authoritarian measures, which is ultimately fascism, which is the strong-arm defense mechanism of capitalism in crisis. So to be right-wing, the core foundational concepts that comprise what it means to be right-wing is to be pro-capitalist, which means to be pro-authoritarian, pro-status quo. To be a leftist is to be anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist, destroy the status quo, which is oppressive and brutal to the vast majority of the people on Earth. To be centrist in the center of that is to be what's a liberal or progressive. Someone who thinks that they like capitalism, they want to keep capitalism, but they think, and they can often even apply a Marxist critique to go, yeah, man, if capitalism is these right-wingers, if they're these capitalists, if this ruling class, these bosses, if they're allowed to just run rampant and do whatever they want, they're going to oppress a lot of people. So while we want to keep this capitalist system going, we want to make concessions with them, and we want to, kind of reel them in a little bit. So that's what being centrist is, and traditionally that's liberal. Now, in America, we have all these different confused notions of what liberal is, but historically and throughout Europe, liberal or social democrats, these are people that, they understood the basics of a socialist critique of capitalism. They understood that capitalism, left unfettered, is of course going to create monopoly and exploitation. They thought that they could make concessions of it, and that historically is what it means to be centrist under capitalism. Now, this concept was all relevant, and the reason we're all watching this video and this is happening is because of my interaction with Ben Burgis, and I said that I had a falling out with an exchange with him on, a negative exchange, I guess, with him on Facebook, and which we haven't really covered, and we will cover more in the next chapter to follow this one after this section of the video. But it was relevant because he had made this comment about, anybody who thinks that Chomsky is liberal is completely off their, they're just so far out of the game that they're only deserving of pity. I'm paraphrasing. I thought, well, this is just totally exemplary of how even liberals who like Marx may even think they're Marxists, can get caught up in this notion of these liberal preoccupations of minor differences between various people that we put in place to maintain the status quo of capitalism. No Biden or Obama or Hillary or Trump or any of these people are going to end capitalism or end Western imperialist hegemonic power over the world. So to assert that whatever arbitrary differences really that that Biden has from Trump, is not a socialist. A socialist would not see any significant or any type of difference that is deserving of any type of real attention, because all of them will maintain the status quo. Now, one of the things that Chomsky really sort of hinged all this on, this why it will be different, and then we'll wrap this up, and I'm really going to get into what I said, which is what the historic socialists have had to say about being involved in bourgeois electoral politics. But Chomsky talked about how the grassroots movement that sort of built up around the Bernie campaign and his sort of alliance with grassroots organizations, various leftist organizations, and there were a lot of leftists that kind of hate Biden, will never get on board with a Biden administration, who were skeptically willing to show support to a Bernie Sanders campaign. And so Chomsky is saying that grassroots element is going to have more influence over a Biden administration than it will over a Trump administration. And I think it's clear that there really is no substantial reason to believe that. And what's more, even if it was true, and then go and focus your efforts as a leftist into trying to achieve that type of sort of arbitrary concession, it's not a socialist goal and it's not a socialist effort. And I think that historic socialists almost unanimously would argue that that is a complete distraction from what leftists, real anti-capitalists, real anti-authoritarian, revolutionary socialists want to achieve. So what is that? Well, in this next segment, it's going to be kind of lengthy But we're going to hear from what Marx thought about being involved with parliamentary electoral bourgeois politics, what Pierre-Joseph Proudhon thought of it, what Emma Goldman thought of it, and most significantly, we're going to take a look at Rico Malatesta's pamphlet, Vote What For? So strap in. This is a long segment. We put a lot of music in. I had some help with SoCal Shannon. Thank you so much for that. And let's take a look now. Are Marx, Proudhon, Emma Goldman, and Malatesta in agreement with Noam Chomsky's assessment that Biden would be different than Trump?
The commune intended to abolish that class property which makes the labor of the many the wealth of the few. It wanted to make individual property a truth by transforming the means of production, land, and capital, now chiefly the means of enslaving and exploiting labor, into mere instruments of free and associated. With labor emancipated, every man becomes a working man, and productive labor ceases to be a class attribute. Present society, with its two poles of capital and wages slavery. The commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. We want the mines, canals, and railways handed over to democratically organized workers' associations. We want these associations to be models for agriculture, industry and trade, the pioneering core of that vast federation of companies and societies woven into the common cloth of the democratic and social republic. We want property, but property restored to its proper limits. That is to say, free disposition of the fruits of labor. Property minus usury. Because of the formation of a class of capitalists or proprietors, another class of workers, and a third of talents, the worker has wound up enslaved. Socialism thus consists of reducing the aristocratic formula of capital, labor, talent into the simpler formula of labor, to make every citizen simultaneously equal and to the same extent capitalist, worker, and expert or artist. The organic origin of the proletariat is located in the division of society into two classes, one that works and does not own, the other that owns but does not work. Besides universal suffrage, and as a consequence of universal suffrage, we want implementation of the binding mandate, mandat imperatif. Politicians balk at it, which means that in their eyes, the people, in electing representatives, do not appoint mandatories, but rather abjure their sovereignty. That is assuredly not socialism. It is not even democracy. In her famous essay, Anarchism, What It Really Stands For, Emma quotes Thoreau, who said,
"All voting is a sort of gaming, like checkers or backgammon, a playing with right and wrong. Its obligation never exceeds that of expediency. Even voting for the right thing is doing nothing for it. A wise man will not leave the right to the mercy of chance, nor wish to prevail through the power of the majority."
Elections, Goldman knew, consist primarily of
wire pulling, intriguing, flattering, lying, cheating. In fact, chicanery of every description, whereby the political aspirant can achieve success. Added to that is a complete demoralization of character and conviction, until nothing is left that would make one hope for anything from such a human derelict. Time and time again, the people were foolish enough to trust, believe, and support with their last farthing aspiring politicians, only to find themselves betrayed and cheated.
Vote What For? Rico Malatesta. 1959 English translation of Enrico Malatesta's pamphlet, Vote, What For? By the New York-based Libertarian League, scanned for libcom.org by New York/New Jersey Workers Solidarity Alliance Archives. George, this beer's not too bad, is it? Jack, yeah, it's all right. But what a price. George, shocking, especially when you remember that what things used to cost. Still, you can't wonder with all these taxes. It costs you twice as much to live as it used to. They put up the price of some things and say you can do without them, but you can't do without bread and food and clothes. You have to pay the rent all the same. And then there are the taxes on this and the rates on our wages too. What a life. And it's our own fault. If we wanted to, we could alter things. The working class has the remedy in its own hands. Jack. Why? What's your remedy? George. Easy enough. You've gotta vote. Jack. What's that got to do with it? George. Have you or haven't you? Jack. Well, I'm entitled to a vote, but I never make use of it. George. There you are. You've got a vote, but you just won't take the trouble to use it, and then you wonder why things are so bad. You deserve all you get, honestly. People like you are responsible for all the trouble in the world. Jack. All right. Keep your hair on. Just tell me what's the good of voting. Jack. It's obvious. Who makes the laws? The MPs. Elect good MPs, and you get good laws. Jack. Good counselors and good MPs? We've heard that for a long time. But you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to notice it's the same stooges that always get in. Oh, it's wonderful to hear them when they're after votes at election time. They pat you on the back, ask after the wife and kids, kiss the baby, promise you railways, bridges, work, cheap bread, less taxes, higher wages, protection, absolutely everything. And once they get in, they're no better than anyone else. Goodbye promises. The wife and the kids may starve. There's no more or less work than before. The whole town could be falling to pieces for all they care. They've other things to think about than your troubles. Then a few years later, they start the ballyhoo again. It doesn't matter what color the party is. They're all the same. As soon as they're elected, they forget all about you. They're in their clubs and at their select dinners, and they don't even trouble to come and have a look at you until the next election. George. That's correct. But why elect the rich? Don't you know that the rich only live on the work of the masses? So how do you expect them to worry about the masses? All they think of is getting as much out of the ordinary man as they can. Jack. Now you're talking. But it's not only the rich, there's the other type, who want to get elected so they can become rich. George, that's true. So let's vote for them. Let's elect workers, experienced friends of ours, as you might say, and then we won't be fooled. Oh, we've got some of your experienced friends, quote unquote, in now, and they're no different from our acknowledged enemies. Anyhow, what do you mean, let's elect, as if we, you and me, could do as we like? George. But it's not only us too. If each one of us tried to convert other people as they would do the same, Labor would have a majority and we could elect whoever we liked. And that's when we could form a government of the workers and then, Jack, and then it would be a paradise. I mean, for those who were in Parliament, you're arranging things a bit too quickly. Those in command always have the majority. The rich are always in power. Just imagine a poor worker, perhaps with an ill wife and 4 hungry kids, and you tell him to risk his job and get thrown out of his house to starve, just to give his vote to a candidate his master doesn't like. Just try and convince those poor devils who can be thrown out of work by their boss whenever he likes. They're never free. If they want to be free, they don't want to waste their time voting, just take what they need. George. But if we didn't do that, no one would vote. We couldn't go to the workers to ask them to vote for our party and say at the same time that votes were useless. Jack. That's just it. And on top of that, you have to make election promises you know you can't keep. And then you have to stand in with the government and mix with the well-to-do and all the rest of it. As soon as any of your men are elected, they have to kowtow to the people you admit are the opponents of the workers. So why the hell talk about propaganda when the first thing you do is to counteract propaganda? George, but you must admit, it's an advantage to have our own men with a voice in affairs. Jack, an advantage for themselves, and maybe for some of their friends, but for the mass of people? Tell it to the Marines. You can see what happens as soon as the MPs get elected. Socialists go over to the Tories. They become independents and other brands of opportunists. It's these rascals who hoodwink the whole of their followers, worse even than the church can do. As soon as socialists, who have perhaps been persecuted like criminals when they were out of office, like Ramsay MacDonald was, get appreciated and estimated by the rich and shake hands with royalty, they're won over. When they do run foul of the government, it's always with kid gloves. They know they're all pals together. They all sit together smugly in the smoking room, the best of friends. You can't imagine them getting too rough even in the debating chamber. And you're the devil of a long way from seeing them having their heads bashed in by the police as they used to get in the old days. George, oh, you're too severe. We know men are only men, and we have to stand for some weaknesses. But the thing to do is choose the best men, not always the same ones. Jack, at that rate, you'll be mass-producing racketeers if you keep changing the candidates. Haven't we got enough traitors? All those who pass through the mill are ground to flour. As soon as you send someone to office, they turn traitor. They mix with the rich and want to keep up with them. I'm willing to admit a man is a genuine socialist when he gives up his time and his energy, his money and his ability, exposes himself to imprisonment and victimization just to fight corruption and capitalism. But these MPs of yours are only professing socialists, running with the hare and hunting with the hounds, on par with the professing Christians who preach loving kindness and are the worst swindlers of the lot. George, now you're going too far. Among the socialist leaders you insult are men who have known what it is to go hungry, and who have worked and suffered for the cause, who have given proof. Jack, get away with your proof. Even Hitler went hungry and worked for his cause. Have we got to respect him now he's become a scoundrel of the lowest order? Why, every whore was a virgin once. It's this respect for leaders that has brought socialism down. Socialism should have been the hope of the people, and your leaders have made it a curse. As soon as you get labor men in government, do you call that propaganda? George, still, if you're not satisfied with certain leaders, you can get rid of them. The voters can choose whom they like. Jack, can they? What choice has anyone ever got? You can vote for Tweedledum, and if you don't like him, you can have Tweedledee. Instead of throwing smoke in people's eyes about this voting business, you ought to destroy their confidence in the whole electoral setup, whether for Parliament or the councils. The most important causes of misery are first, private ownership, which prevents a man from working unless he submits to those who own the land and tools and accepts their conditions. And secondly, government, which protects the exploiters and takes part in exploitation. George, well, of course. You have to convince people that their interests are in voting for their own candidate in order to defy their bosses. We have to organize to prevent the exploiter from crushing the liberties of the people. Jack, just in order to vote for Mr. Jones or Mr. Brown? Of course, we should organize, but not just to add one more member to Parliament. We want to organize to convince the people that we've been robbed of all the good things of the world, that we have the right to take the whole of our own products, and we can do it without taking orders from anyone. George, yes, but you must always have someone in charge to get things organized. Jack, Not at all, George. But the people are too ignorant to run the whole affairs of life themselves. Jack, ignorant. If they weren't ignorant, they would soon see through these people who want to run the whole affairs of life for them. If you only left them alone and didn't mislead them, you can be sure the people would run affairs much better than these racketeers who say they want to govern us for our own good and then treat us like cattle. Besides, you say the people are too ignorant to have freedom, but you think they are clever enough to elect MPs? And if they vote for your candidates, you say they're full of wisdom. Isn't it easier to look after your own business than get someone else to do it? If the MPs wanted to defend our interests, they'd ask what we wanted and how we wanted it, and not us to get them to act as they like and betray us if and when they like. George, still, people can't do everything themselves. There must be someone to look after public interests in politics. Jack, what do you mean politics? If you mean the art of fooling the people all the time, I can assure you that we don't mind doing without it. If you mean by politics the general interest and welfare of everyone, we can look after that ourselves. We all know how to eat and drink and to amuse ourselves. I'm damned if I'll go to a specialist if I want to blow my nose, and then give him the right to squeeze it if I don't blow it in the way he likes. The shoemaker makes the shoes and the builders makes the house. But nobody ever thought of giving shoemakers and builders the right to order us around and starve us out. These men who want to get into Parliament for the sake of public welfare, what do they do for the people? When were the socialist MPs and borough councillors even better than anyone else? No. They're all the same breed. George, so you attack the socialists too? You forget that they are so few in number. They have to have a majority, and besides, their hands are tied. Jack, then when do they accept office when their hands are tied? There's only one reason. They want to look after their own interests. George, you're an anarchist, of course. Jack, yes, I am. So what? George, well, anarchism seems to me to be too advanced. I'm a socialist. You're right in a lot of things. But if I'd known you were an anarchist at first, I wouldn't have told you that we could get better conditions through Parliament, because I know that so long as there are poor, the laws will be made by the rich and always to their own advantage. Jack, oh, I see. You know improvement won't come through Parliament, but you still tell people to vote. When you know I'm an anarchist, you know I won't believe that fairy story about voting for progress, so you admit that you know yourself you're getting the people to vote for certain candidates will never bring what you promise them. I know you're not being paid to lie and deceive the masses, so what makes you do it then? George, no, hold your horses. If I tell the people to give their votes, it's for the sake of propaganda. Don't you see how good it is to have some of our own men in Parliament? They can make propaganda better than anyone else. They can say things that we'd be run in for, and when they speak, all the papers report it. Jack, oh, so it's for propaganda you turn election agent, is it? Some propaganda. Listen, first you tell the people to hope and expect everything from Parliament, that revolution isn't necessary, that all the worker has to do is slip a piece of paper in a box and then you'll do the rest. Then you admit that this won't really achieve anything, it's only propaganda. Isn't this propaganda exactly opposite to your own ideas? The rich will always defend these two institutions desperately, whatever the cost. Deceit and lies have always been used, and they don't stop at the jail, the gallows, and machine guns. Elections are no use against that. We don't want a change of masters, but a complete revolution, making an absolute break with the past. We must have a genuine commonwealth, where everyone is certain of food, clothing, and shelter. The landowners must be ejected by the farm workers so they can work the land for themselves and everyone else. The workers must kick out their bosses and organize production for the common good. They must get together and refuse to tolerate any government whatever. Agreement must be made in every district between everyone in the same job. The workers must run the places of work, and every district must be linked up in a common bond of industrial unity. And it will certainly succeed when everyone's interests depend on it. We won't fight amongst ourselves any longer or tolerate war between workers or different nations. War and competition will disappear. Machinery won't turn people out of work, but will help work, make it more agreeable and productive and less wearisome. There'll be no more untilled land. We won't just produce 1/10 of what we need as we do now. On the contrary, we shall employ all known methods in order to increase the quantity of food and the quality of products. The whole of society will be one union of producers and consumers. George, all this is very well, but it's very difficult to bring about. Your ideal is magnificent, but there's one drawback. How are you going to put it into practice? I agree that revolution is the only salvation, whatever we do, but it's impossible now. We must make the best of what we can, and that's electioneering. It's propaganda, after all. Jack, you've the nerve to call it propaganda? Haven't you noticed what your propaganda leads to? You've deserted our socialist program, joined the ranks of the worst exploiters of the workers, gone in with the political imposters who make a noise to gain power. You bring trouble within the socialist ranks, and your headquarters fights its own rank and file while it fraternizes with the Tories. You've forgotten all about revolution. You're only thinking of electing Jones and Brown, and when you talk about change, you've no intentions of doing anything drastic. Oh, the road to Westminster doesn't lead to the social revolution. All you've done with your propaganda is to tempt some people who might have been decent socialists to go to Parliament and turn MPs. You've created the parliamentary illusion that blinds any sight of revolution. You've discredited socialism as everyone looks on the Socialist Party as a party of the government they suspect and despise. It's the end of everyone who looks to getting in power. George, well, what do you want us to do? Why don't you come in and help us instead of remaining outside and criticizing? Jack, now I haven't yet spoken of what we anarchists are doing, but I'll tell you this, that you socialists are one of our big obstacles. Our activities have been paralyzed for years because of your propaganda for parliamentarianism, and you're deluding the workers to trust those who have betrayed them. We have to waste time counteracting your propaganda when we could be pushing forward to a social revolutionary change. I hope more and more people get disgusted with trusting your party. It's only that way we'll ever get a revolutionary feeling. George, well, hurry up and make your revolution, and you can be sure the mass of our people will be on your side if it ever came to a revolution, the rank and file, anyhow. Jack, oh, I see. Make the revolution and we'll join you. If you believe in a revolution, why not help us make it? George, to tell you the truth, if I thought revolution was any way practicable now, I wouldn't mind going over to you. I admit this election business makes me sick, and I'd like to let some of our leaders go to hell. But I honestly can't see where we could do anything about revolution today. Jack, all you want to know is what you want, and put energy into it, and you'll soon find what could be done. First of all, we have to propagate real socialism. And instead of spinning yarns about trusting politicians and voting for people, getting people to despise the parliamentary racket and the whole political machine. Let the rich do the electing by themselves, while the whole public despises them for it. When the workers lose faith in the ballot box swindle, they'll see the necessity for the social revolution. Let's go to the election meetings, if you like, and expose the lies and pretenses of the various candidates. Let's make propaganda, not among the rich in Westminster, but among the workers' organizations and in the factories, and create new groups and explain to everyone how the workers can emancipate themselves. Let's take an active part in strikes and create a gulf between the wage slaves and the bosses. Let's be on the spot whenever there's a struggle between the people and the rulers, and give the movement of struggle a conscience. Let's get among the masses suffering injustice, forced discipline, privations, no matter where it is, and create a movement that's going to struggle against the ruling class. Once we have the movement going, ideas come by themselves. Let's always be in the midst of the masses and let them understand what they should be after. They themselves must struggle for freedom. It can't be done for them. And we must be in their midst. And while we do all this, let's approach people who feel like we do and who slowly and steadily begin to understand and accept our ideas. With those we must unite and prepare the elements for general and decisive action for the emancipation of the working classes. George, let's shake hands on that. They can go to hell with their elections. I want to learn more of anarchism.
Okay, so there you go. I mean, look, whether you agree with Marx, Proudhon, Emma Goldman, Malatesta, and other socialists, and the other socialists who helped create the movement we know as socialism, whether you agree with them or not, really, in terms of this larger discussion, it's totally irrelevant. The bottom line is, that's the socialist position. The one that Chomsky is holding, that incremental, we use that term a lot, but really it's change for a small demographic of very specific people in some type of marginal way who whose lives will be made better, is not a leftist goal. The leftist goal is to dismantle the thing that we have to make little concessions with for this demographic, because while you're so focused on that demographic, you're ignoring all the other demographics that are perpetually abused, exploited, and in many cases even murdered by the larger mechanisms of Western imperialist, capitalist, authoritarian status quo. Okay? So, now, one can argue that it's important to get the concessions from the beast of capitalist, imperialist status quo to help it, if even at best, just this one demographic of people will suffer less. And if you say no, wow, you sure seem shitty. You know, because I'm not going to focus on them. I mean, that's just one small demographic of people. Well, those are real people whose lives will arguably be better under a Biden administration than they would under a Trump administration. But in the broader picture, a socialist argues that focusing on that concession completely takes away from the efforts and the energy necessary to combat the whole mechanisms of imperialist capitalism altogether. And you'll see, like, in that argument, that in the Malatesta pamphlet, you see where George is saying, well, why don't you just get on the outside? If you just help us more within this parliamentary system, you know, we could do bigger things than just help this one little marginalized group, right? But again, that's a liberal argument. The socialist is saying, no. Why don't you get on board with us? Let's end the whole fucking fandangle and make suffering less for people all over the world, as opposed to one group in America. Or maybe, you know, some people in Iran, or possibly a royal or two in Saudi Arabia. I mean, let's get real. There's still no fucking clean drinking water in Flint, man. And Biden ain't gonna make a difference for that. Obama didn't, Trump didn't. Okay? So, again, you can disagree with Proudhon, you can disagree with Marx, you can disagree with Emma Goldman, you can disagree with Malatesta, and you can disagree with my interpretation of what they said. Bottom line is, if you disagree with all that, you disagree with the socialist position, which means you're not a socialist. Which means you're either what? A far-right fascist? Nah. Now, I wouldn't say that of you progressives. No, you're liberals. You're centrist. Okay? And I'm not arguing whether I feel that your position isn't as good. Clearly, I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. I'm a socialist. So clearly, I believe in the socialist, anti-capitalist, revolutionary, anti-authoritarian position. And that's why I feel confident calling myself a leftist. Now, if you don't believe in that, you're just not one. And that's fine. Go be a fucking liberal. I don't care. Just please don't call yourself a socialist when you're not. Now, that brings us to what I've been teasing throughout the video, my debate with Ben Burgis, which really wasn't a debate. It was me stating a few positions and then him sort of berating me and insulting me and belittling me and dismissing my positions without actually addressing any of them. So I'm going to go through that real quick. It's just they're a little bit long comments because we're both long-winded people, Ben and I. But we'll try to get through this as quick as we can, and you can make your own assessment of it. I think that he at no point addressed any of my arguments. He, in fact, just was dismissive of them and wrote them off as either rants or irrelevant, but never says why they're irrelevant, and completely dismisses my claim of gaslighting, which I just want to reassert that if you feel, especially after watching this video, if you feel that the statement that saying Noam Chomsky is a liberal means you've lost the plot so thoroughly that the only appropriate response is pity, I think that fits under gaslighting, because what it's saying is you've completely lost touch with reality. And if you say, well, how have I lost touch with reality? Well, if you even ask that, you're only deserving of pity. So at no point do you say why I've completely lost touch with reality or lost the plot so thoroughly. You just tell me I'm only deserving of pity of it for it. So I think that that's something that causes me to question my reality, as opposed to addressing the specific tenets and points of why I've reached the conclusion, and why many leftists have reached the conclusion that Chomsky's pretty much a fucking liberal anymore. Okay, so before we fully jump into the exchange between myself and Burgis, I really want to highlight the definitions of gaslighting, because it becomes relevant in the discussion, and I brought it up a number of times, and some may argue that I might be wrong on my position that what Ben said was gaslighting. Certainly Ben takes that position. According to Oxford Dictionary, gaslight is verb to manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. Gaslighting is a tactic in which a person or entity, in order to gain more power, makes a victim question their reality. What does it mean when someone is gaslighting you? Take the verb gaslight. Gaslighting is used to describe abusive behavior, specifically when an abuser manipulates information in such a way as to make a victim question his or her sanity. Gaslighting intentionally makes someone doubt their memories or perception of reality. Now, I interpret that to apply to what Ben Burgis said. Now, some people may disagree with that. Clearly, there's I think one of the more prominent forms of gaslighting that we know of is the most extreme, very abusive, ongoing type of thing that's very real, that happens, like with the abusive husband who's perpetually gaslighting their spouse and manipulating them and abusing them and beating them and all this other garbage shit that gets tied up in long-term mental and emotional abuse through the form of gaslighting. And that is a very real and terrible form of gaslighting, but there are also small individual acts of gaslighting. And I would assert that to say that someone has so thoroughly lost the plot that they're only deserving of pity is to take someone's argument and, rather than argue it, is to put them in a position to question their reality and their understanding of reality. Is it an ongoing form of abuse so that he can win over some massive form of power? No, but in that moment, he seemingly has an intellectual power over me because he's in a position to pity me. Really, pity is something that someone looks down on you with. Now, with all that said, let's get into my response to Ben arguably either or either not gaslighting. But we do go at the argument of whether or not you're wrong to believe that Chomsky is a liberal. I think that this video has already clearly articulated that, but I want you to see the way this exchange went down with this liberal who thinks he's a leftist socialist. His diagnosis isn't liberal, but clearly his remedy is and has been for some time now. So you can save your ill-advised pity. Thanks. Also, gaslighting of wide swaths of people based on a totally unnuanced and, frankly, just wrong assessment of the position held by many of those you gaslit, duly noted. Chomsky has not been significantly connected to the socialist struggle in the streets for decades, aside from some scarce attendance of Occupy events, putting aside his many problematic and disconnected positions on Antifa over the last few years, and those of us who have been organizing have noticed the effect it has had on his analysis. To say anything even approaching the air of complimentary about a 100% pro-capitalist, status quo racist and rapist just because he's less rapey and racist than the other guy, or based on some misguided notions of Supreme Court nominations or the Iran deal, is liberal. Tell me how any of his recent statements can be construed as socialist in any way. I would have to conclude that you were making the assertion that if Chomsky said it, it can't be liberal. Now, of course, this is just my observation and guess, okay? But clearly, I would have to conclude that you were making the assertion that if Chomsky said it, it can't be liberal, which is clearly to commit the appeal to authority fallacy. Chomsky said is not an argument. Neither is, if Chomsky said it, it must be socialist. Again, thanks for the gaslighting, though. Lastly, like I said, he's a guy who recognizes and can properly diagnose the ills of capitalism, but his remedy has increasingly grown into more and more liberal-ass claptrap over the years. And to which Ben had to say the following. Agree or disagree with his position on tactical voting, saying he was saying something positive about Biden because he sees Biden as a monster, but thinks that it makes tactical sense to vote for him in swing states to stop a worse monster from retaining power, is a silly straw man.
Okay, that's not what I said. What I have been trying to articulate to this dude from the start is that Chomsky's position, the one that Ben Burgis just stated, fundamentally not a socialist one. So whether you see Biden as an equal or lesser monster, whether or not you feel it makes less or more tactical sense to vote for him in either a swing state or otherwise, to stop what you perceive to be a worse monster from retaining power is not my argument. And it's not saying whether that's gooder or better or lesser or worser or badder. What I'm saying is, if you were putting emphasis on what you see as those differences, that's a liberal position and not a socialist one, because a socialist one wants to undo the entire mechanisms that create the atmosphere with which we would pick an equal or lesser monster to make better or lesser tactical sense in some type of fucking swing state vote thingy-madingy.
And all the stuff about it makes tactical sense to vote for him in swing states to stop blah, blah, blah. I don't recall Chomsky saying that. He may have, but I didn't catch it. But tactical sense for what? What are your goals? Are your goals to end imperialist power and capitalism, or are your goals to get a less brutal imperialist, capitalist, authoritarian piece of shit? All depends on your goals. I wouldn't characterize that as a straw man, though. Now here's where it gets fun. Otherwise, the non-ranty parts of this comment are directed at irrelevancies. This motherfucker, man. So either I'm ranting or I'm irrelevant. Okay. All right, that's not gaslighting or dismissive or a complete disregard of me personally, as well as completely ignoring 100% altogether the specifics of the argument I made. You just called it ranty and irrelevant, yet at no point do you describe why it's irrelevant. So, who said he's personally involved in activism in this stage of his life? Well, no one did. In fact, no one said anything about activism at all, Ben. You did. I talked about how he's not involved in organizing, and there's a very significant difference. Now, your next question is, who said is thinking something is a good enough reason to think it's true? Certainly not me. Now, that's true. You didn't say that. You didn't say that just because Chomsky said it, it's true. That was an assumption I made that you were that's something I assumed you took for granted as a truism when you made the statement that to assert that he's a liberal means you've so thoroughly lost the game that you're only deserving of pity. Again, I had to speculate as to why you would be that dismissive of so many people in the long and experienced and intelligent and well-informed leftist community. Again, you didn't clarify that. You did say a lot in your various comments on that original post that you want to ascribe this way of thinking to tankies. I don't think you know what a fucking tanky is, realistically. Sorry. I think that when you use it as a disparaging way, I think that you have so completely lost the thing or whatever that you're only deserving of more actual factual information. Anyway, that is what you call ranty. But he's right. He didn't say that if Chomsky said it, it's true. Now, he goes on to say, and accusing people of gaslighting for expressing a sincere opinion with which you strongly disagree is just stupid as hell. Now, what is the sincere opinion of his with which I strongly disagree? Well, his sincere opinion is that anyone who thinks that Chomsky has gone liberal has so completely lost their fucking shit that they're only deserving of pity from masterful intellects such as Mr. Ben Burgis. I reassert, it's gaslighting, comrade. Now, he says, don't do that if you want to be taken seriously by anyone with half a brain. Okay, so I guess if you agree with me or if you see any type of validity in my argument that that could be construed and taken as gaslighting, that you only have half a brain. This intellect, it constantly comes back to these things like you only have half a brain and stupid as hell and ranty and irrelevant, not worthy of his fucking time, right? Anyway, to which I said, based on what are you asserting that he will be better on anything? Being involved with actual leftists who do actual organizing is how leftists stay sharp in their material analysis. It is in those organizing rooms where praxis and dialectical materialism are not only put to practice in real time on the street, but held up also to the immediate scrutiny of one's peers. It's where analysis is tested and weighed against consensus. Chomsky not participating in those activities is precisely why he concludes that there is any kind of actual material, demonstrable difference between Biden and Trump other than rhetorical form. Also, when you assert that someone is deserving of pity, you call into question their disposition of need. Bad form, it's gaslighting, at the very least it's utterly devoid of any sense of solidarity. And I still haven't heard an argument that articulates how Chomsky's remedy isn't a liberal one. It's not anti-capitalist, nor anti-authoritarian in any way. And compromising with capitalism, one could argue strongly, is the very definition of liberalism. Now, I want to pause for a minute on this activist versus organizer. There's a massive difference. And I think they're both incredibly important, and I have immense respect for both demographics. I'm just going to say it out front. I aspire to be a good organizer. That's the camp I want to be in, okay? But I would not disparage activists. But activists are people who go to as many marches as they can, participate, they learn, they take the time to understand different issues well. So when they go out in the street and they demonstrate, and when they share things online, and when they share articles, they're finding the right articles, and they're doing good work, and they're informing people. And that's fucking activism, man. That shit's really important. But that is not organizing. Let's be real, man. Organizers are the people who create all that shit that the activists go to and share. That's reality. And when you get in a room with people who are motivated to the point where they're creating shut down ICE demonstrations, or when they're doing putting into real-time action mutual aid efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic, when you're working with people who are trying to shut down ICE camps, man, when you've got people who are organizing national marches and organizing forums and panel discussions on anti-capitalist revolutionary issues like abolishing ICE and mutual aid efforts and making people aware of the coup attempts in Venezuela and this kind of stuff. The people who organize those things are the people who have spent years and years, in most cases, really studying socialist history and literature and testing the theory and putting it in real time and real practice. And those people, just 9 out of 10 times, man, me personally, that's who I want to go to, and that's whose opinion I care about on really, really big, important topics irrelevant to achieving leftist goals. And the people within that community have for years now been talking about, wow, man, Chomsky's kind of not so much about ending capitalism and authoritarianism. He's willing to accept a less brutal authoritarian capitalist than another authoritarian capitalist. And maybe one could be argued that he's just asserting that it's better, and I guess that's a semantic argument again, whether one is better than the other. Trump, that's okay, but does voting for Biden better in the sense of how it's relevant to socialist goals of anti-capitalism and anti-authoritarianism? No, it's not relevant at all, and to think it is, you have to be preoccupied with a liberal position. Now, let's see what Ben had to say about my comments. Most of this isn't worth engaging with. That's very convenient for you, Ben. The deeply stupid and offensive 2 abuse victims gaslighting allegation. Well, I think I've already covered that. I still feel it's gaslighting. You may disagree, but as someone who's been subjected to that basically my whole fucking life, I'm super sensitive to being gaslit, and I still assert it's gaslighting. So whether it's deeply stupid or not, I guess that's for the viewer to determine, but to think that it's offensive to abuse victims, I think that's a fucking stretch at best. But anyway, the bizarre claim that being personally involved in activism makes you more likely to have correct political analysis, well, I just fucking explained that, didn't I? One, I didn't talk about activism, I talked about organizing, and the fact that Ben doesn't know the fucking difference might just be another example of why he's a fucking liberal and not a socialist. Then he says, the weird burden of proof posturing. I haven't heard an argument that he's not a liberal, etc. No, what I said was, how is these specific positions on Biden as opposed to Trump not liberal positions? Explain to me how that's a socialist position, which at no point does he do. No, because it's, stupid and irrelevant and ranty, right? Or not worth engaging. Okay, so yes, of course Biden versus Trump makes a material difference. Look at Obama's NLRB appointees versus Trump's, for example. Living in the real world, this motherfucker, enough to recognize that different potential managers of the system have different strategic approaches, that those differences have far more than rhetorical effects. Wow. And that which enemy we spend the next 4 years fighting and on what terrain actually does matter isn't in any way in tension with anti-capitalism. Okay, so this motherfucker thinks that the socialist position is to find the difference in our potential managers of the system that we as socialists want to fucking destroy.
And that those differences have more than rhetorical effects. That's true. I have, early in the video, I did overemphasize, I think, the relevance of the rhetorical differences, but then I think I did make a point to clarify that, there's specific human lives that will be directly affected. It's just that it's such a small number, and the amount of people that are left out of the benefit is just staggeringly larger than those that are affected by it. So no, it's not, it's beyond rhetorical effects, but it's marginal, arguably.
And that which enemy we spend the next 4 years fighting and on what terrain actually doesn't matter isn't in any way in tension with anti-capitalism. Well, I think that Malatesta argued that in a sense it is in tension with anti-capitalism because it's a complete distraction from the efforts of anti-capitalism when you liberals could be over, instead of trying to get your little concessions from your different manager of your oppression, you could be over here trying to end that oppression altogether.
Is it in tension with anti-capitalism? Well, socialism isn't defined by whether or not you are in tension with anti-capitalism. It's defined by whether you are anti-capitalist or not. So whether something is in tension with anti-capitalism, well then yes, that would not be a socialist thing. But socialists are not defined by whether or not they are in tension with the concept of anti-capitalism. That's some liberal-ass claptrap, big time.
But then this motherfucker says, in any case, go ahead and have the last word. Okay, here it is. You unjustifiably self-righteous, condescendingly fucking ignorant to socialist history, liberal ass, dickbag hack motherfucker, go write a fucking book about it.
Poser.
All that we achieved thus far was accomplished on collectivized power, but there's an age-old scheme to deceive us all that those capitalists won't ever fall. That's a lie. Get up and fight. Every human being has a right to fight for their own fucking page in history. Politicians, talking heads, and celebrities don't own a monopoly on history. The process of advancing philosophy is only for those who can afford the fee. That's a lie. Get up and fight. Every human being has a right to fight for their own fucking page in history. One world, and we're all fucking living on it. A slave herd is how the boss has always fucking wanted it. One world, and yeah, I'm fucking living on it. But the slave herd, I never asked to be a fucking part of it. Rousseau, and that social fucking contract, yeah, fuck that. Revolution's what I'm fucking getting at. Socratic is a human disposition. Rich and poor alike have a right to that shit. Tearing apart the status quo is a long tradition from thinking fucking people all over the planet. Every fucking word a human understands been scrawling on pages and is waiting for you. Arrested, ingested, know what's really true, and minimize their stranglehold on you. There's a centuries-old hierarchy
patriarchal scheme that grinds down hard on your dignity, feverishly feeding us complacency as the only way to ever be free. That's a lie. Get up and fight. Every human being has a right to fight for their own fucking page in history. One world, and we're all fucking living on it. A slave herd is how the boss has always fucking wanted it. One world, and yeah, I'm fucking living on it. But the slave herd, I never asked to be a fucking part of it. Rousseau, and that social fucking contract, yeah, fuck that. Revolution's what I'm fucking getting at. All that we've achieved thus far was accomplished on collectivized power, but there's an age-old scheme to deceive us all that those capitalists won't ever fall. Politicians, talking heads, and celebrities don't own a monopoly on history. The process of advancing philosophy is only for those who can afford to feed. That's a lie. Get up and fight. Every human being has a right to fight for their own fucking page in history. Getting Socratic is a human disposition. Rich and poor alike have a right to that shit. Canada Martin's death was a long tradition from thinking fucking people all over the planet. One world, and we're all fucking living on it. A slave herd is how the boss has always fucking wanted it. One world, and yeah, I'm fucking living on it. But the slave herd, I never asked to be a fucking part of it. Rousseau, and that social fucking contract, yeah, fuck that. Revolution's what I'm fucking getting at.